Back when I was in secondary school, which may shock a few of you, was over 10 years ago, I fell in love with the subject geography. I had a passionate teacher, so that made me passionate. For that reason, I went on, chose my A-levels, geography, maths, physics, and English language. Bit of an odd mix with English language, I know, but I wanted to be a civil engineer. But I missed out on one grade. I thought my life was over, but my path changed. Geography at Chester. And it was in Chester that I realised I had a passion for climate change solutions. And that's what I wanted to do as my career. But I had no idea what that actually meant. So I did 2 years at the Students' Union. And it was there that I fell in love with graduate skills and ensuring that our students were prepared for a world of work in a net zero future. So there must have been a way of combining those two things. And there was. Industrial decarbonisation, happening just down the road in Ellesmere Port. But I'll come on to that in just a second. So what's the problem? And why are we looking at industrial decarbonisation? In 2019, the UK government made it law to be net zero by 2050, which means the amount of carbon that we emit into the atmosphere has to equal the amount of carbon that we take out of the atmosphere, making us net zero. 2023, I'm sure we're all aware, was the hottest year on record. The tipping point is 2 degrees Celsius, where scientists say there's no coming back. We're already at 1.48 degrees. Now in the UK, 29% of our CO2 emissions come from heavy industry. And over a third of that 29% come from just these 6 locations across the UK. So naturally, it makes sense to focus here. The UK government labelled these industrial clusters. These are concentrations of heavy industry like oil refining, manufacturing, steel making, that produce these large carbon dioxide emissions. The UK government committed £1 billion to helping these 6 locations become net zero by 2030. Now, each cluster has a plan, but the common theme is transitioning from natural gas to hydrogen gas. But why hydrogen? Well, hydrogen is the most abundant element in the universe, and when it burns clean. There's no toxins, there's no carbon dioxide, it's just water. But it doesn't occur naturally on its own. The 2 most common places that we might find hydrogen is H2O, water, and methane, CH4. Now, I'm not a chemical engineer, I'm a social scientist, so I'm going to do my best at explaining how we get hydrogen. So the process by which we get hydrogen gives it a colour. Grey and black hydrogen involves burning fossil fuels to split carbon dioxide and hydrogen, which is great, we get the hydrogen, but it means we're left with the carbon, and that's emitted into the atmosphere, not what we want when we're trying to achieve net zero. Green hydrogen, arguably the best and cleanest form of hydrogen production. This is splitting water using electricity from renewable energy sources. But currently in the UK, we don't have enough renewable energy to power everything that we need day to day, and also use electrolysis to split water. So we need something that meets in the middle. Blue hydrogen. Now this is a bit controversial because it still means we have to burn fossil fuels. But the best part about it is we capture the carbon and we store it permanently under the ground in old gas fields and oil fields. So it's the best of both worlds. Now it is controversial, like I say, because we still have to burn the fossil fuels. However, it's a stepping stone technology that we can implement in the next 5 years. And that's happening just on our doorstep at Ellesmere Port. This is the HyNet project. The HyNet project is the Merseyside cluster's answer to industrial decarbonisation, and it's happening right now. The orange lines that you can see there is the pipelines that will take the captured carbon out into the Liverpool Bay and store it in the gas fields that are depleted there. The light blue line is where the produced hydrogen is going to go to power industry. So that's glass bottle making, that's steel making, that's refining. And the dashed lines are the potential for where hydrogen could go to power things like public transport. Now, this project is quite high profile. It's attracted a lot of media attention, and it's arguably world-leading. At this scale, nowhere else is doing this yet. But where do the people fit in? That's exactly my question. So why are we looking at the people's part in industrial decarbonisation? Well, currently, UK industry employs 2.4 million people. Now, that provides us with both a risk and an opportunity as we start to transition. The risk is that we see a repeat of the coal mine closures, mass unemployment, and we want to avoid that. The opportunity is that there are 2.4 million people working in this industry with expertise and knowledge that we can harness in this transition to net zero. But currently, the engineering and trades workforce, which arguably is the workforce we need to drive this transition, is already facing huge shortages. Now, to put that into perspective, in order to deliver the HyNet project and industrial decarbonisation just in the Merseyside cluster, there's a job demand of over 21,000. Now, that might not seem like a lot, but when you think of how small Ellesmere Port is and how small Chester is, that is quite a lot. And when you put that into a wider context, that's over 350,000 jobs to deliver industrial decarbonisation in just those 6 locations we saw earlier. That's massive. But there's also another opportunity here. The opportunity to diversify what is traditionally known as a very male-dominated industry. Now, before Christmas, 3 of my friends walked into a bar. This is not a bad joke, it's going somewhere. Some men came over to them, started chatting to them, and asked them what they did for work. So they asked my first friend, "What do you do for work?" And she said, "Well, I'm an engineer." And he said, "An engineer? But you're a woman." In 2023, that was the response. So he turned to the next friend and said, "What do you do for work?" She said, "Well, I'm a scientist." She was met with the same response, "But you're a woman." He turned to my third friend and asked her what she did. She said, "Well, I work in media." He said, "That's a job for a woman." So there's also an opportunity here, not only to harness the knowledge we already have throughout this transition, but to diversify the industry to bring in more knowledge. But how are we going to do it? This is the multi-level perspective. This is the science part, but it won't last long. This is an energy transition framework that theorises in order for a transition to be successful, it has to move through these 3 analytical layers in red. The technological niche, so in this case, that's the carbon capture and the hydrogen production. It's new technology. The socio-technical regime, the processes which will support that technology to thrive. The consumers, the local people, the networks, the infrastructure. And the landscape. These are the macro factors that are putting pressure on the industries to change. In this case, the UK government making it law to be net zero by 2050. But as with anything, there are some problems. The first problem is that it focuses too much on the technological niche. It neglects actors and agency and the role that people will play in delivering the transition. But not only that, there must be a role for the geographical perspective. This is where the geography comes in. As we saw from the map earlier on, there are 6 locations across the UK. So each of these, in and of itself, will have a purpose. It'll have a way of doing things. So we need to consider how that will impact whether a transition will be successful or not. So like I said, these industrial clusters are ecosystems in and of themselves. They're places where people want to work, live, and play, therefore making them places. Now, as individuals, we're attached to a place because of these things. Whether our family lives here, whether our school was here, whether our job is here, whether we like the landscape, we have place attachment. But place attachment can become threatened when there's changes to political influences, economic influences, social influences, environmental influences. This can make us hostile. And that hostility can turn us off to these transitions. If we're not on board, then we can do something about these transitions and prevent them from happening, which we don't want, and neither do industry. So it would be sensible to assume that as these industries transition to net zero and hydrogen, that they're going to have an impact on the sense of place. So that's something that we need to be considering. How do we, as people, work with industries to harness our knowledge, and how do industry work with us to harness their jobs and deliver on the jobs that they need in order to make this a success? So what's the opportunity? Well, the University of Chester is the academic partner for the HyNet project, which is unique. It means that industry want to work with education in order to shape curriculums to better suit a net zero future. We're equipping our students and students across the country with the skills that can be exported out and deliver net zero across the world. But not only that, industry have an opportunity in these locations to support the development of socioeconomics. If we're equipping our local people with the appropriate skills for a transition, then naturally we're going to have better jobs, more wages, and therefore improve the local socioeconomics as we spend back in our local communities. But what does that mean for tomorrow? Well, like I said, Ellesmere Port, just 3 miles away, is uniquely placed at the forefront of a world-leading technological project. But not only that, we have the opportunity here to be world-leading in skills exportation, particularly for those around carbon capture and storage and hydrogen. Now, if I go back to what I said at the beginning about wanting to be a civil engineer, I'm not an engineer. I'm now a social scientist doing a PhD. But I've somehow managed to worm my way back into heavy industry. People keep asking me, what are you going to do when you finish your PhD? And I keep saying, well, I'm going to go and work in oil and gas. And they say, but isn't that against your morals? You're doing a research project on how you're going to solve climate change. But actually, being in these industries is a way of being part of that solution. So if I can leave you with anything today, it's to consider where you want to work in the future and how you want to be part of a solution to climate change. Heavy industry might be dirty, but you can be part of making it cleaner. Thank you.